makes a lot more sense. He was just impressed by how fast the men managed to tear the rings off their wives and say, wait a second, there's a Avodah Zarah going on, don't want to miss this. So
is that why...
Other examples, the Meraglim were all men. Birot Midian is another example. That's the end of this week's, Shlach Lecha with the Meraglim, Balak. But we'll see that the end of the whole story was that Bilam couldn't curse us. He knew that the only way to curse us was to expose us first, to diminish our merits. So it's the easiest way to diminish the merits of the Jewish nation. And he says, simple, send non-Jewish girls and get them in the same trouble. Apparently the same bad habits they had in Egypt were the same ones they kept up. Don't tell me the women were complicit. I don't think any wife would have agreed to this, even with Jewish women, but so much more so with idolatrous ones. And so Rebbe used to point this out, that really women have a much more intuitive sense of right and wrong, and that the men, especially in that particular generation, but really in every generation since, they find very fancy theological and philosophical, rational justifications for their insanity, which incidentally, and again, not to go too far off the point, when it comes to Shalom Bayit, this is classic. A wife will come and say, I'm bothered by this, I'm disturbed by that, I wish we would do more of this, less of that. And the husband's typical response is, yeah, but it's only because I'm working and she doesn't understand, she doesn't appreciate it, she's not. So it's like, it all comes back to me, I want more. And his explanations, but yeah, it should be the Torah, halacha, sure, culture. He'll throw everything he knows about logic into a discussion that really, at the end of the day, is necessarily not a logic. If you're wrong, you're wrong. Don't justify it. Fight for it. So that's just the appetizer for tonight. We have a unique window of time. We basically have another 7 weeks of shiur before I'm going to be on a little bit of hiatus. First time in like 5 years. So I was thinking a little bit about how to divide this up. I was tempted to go the democratic route and ask people, and I decided no. We'll prefer the dictatorial venue. So I think it's nice. It'd be nice if we could focus on in the Hashqafah section on the Sefer Mishel. I say this for a number of reasons. One of them because, and this is classic, and you have to appreciate this when it comes to any book on the Hebrew bookshelf, let alone books from the Tanakh. We said the same thing by Eov, and Yohan's going to finish the sentence before I even started. How do you know that Sefer Mishel is something so fundamental, so basic, and so deep to Jewish wisdom, to Torah, to prophecy, to Ruach HaKodesh? How do you know that this is one of the cornerstones of the Torah and Jewish religion?
So Jay is new, but I'm sure Abigail knows.
Do you remember?
Because no one studied it.
Well, no one learns it.
So what people learn instead?
So why?
What do people learn instead? If you have the choice between Mishel and something else,
well,
what is something else that usual?
Okay, so we'll do about 3 or 4 meters in reverse. What we were just saying about the men. Men have an obsession with chokhmah. Not necessarily a healthy one, because chokhmah can work for good or bad, and there are plenty of examples. And by the way, I'm quoting here the Maharal Prague. This is Czechoslovakia, 520, 30 years ago. The Maharal writes like this. I've noticed that the yeshivot and the ones who attend them in our generation are absolutely possessed by the Talmud, to the exclusion of the Mishnah, of Tanakh, and of the rest of the Midrashim, etc. He writes, I think this is the beginning of the end. I think it's a disaster that nobody learns Mishnah anymore. We should be learning Mishnah, committing them to memory, making them a part of our conscious and subconscious thought. The Torah was meant to be acquired in such a way. What they'd rather do is they'd rather send their kids to yeshiva, where instead of learning the entire Shas, they learn 2 or 3 pages a day. By the time 2 or 3 pages a year, sorry, 2 pages a day would be good. Because by the time a guy gets married, forget that he's no longer 18. Now he's probably 20, which was, a shock in and of itself. The guy's barely finished 1 or 2 masechtot, the smaller ones. He knows nothing about halacha, about hashqafah. His philosophy is all backwards, and all his father cares about is that his son should be smart. He should be able to debate and dispute and discuss in the Gemara. I mean, not even to any productive end. You want to debate and discuss in the Gemara, so you go through it once or twice, and you have a general idea of what the mitzvot are about, and you can compare and contrast what Chazal said here to what Chazal said there. I'll give you a classic example of this, and we're going to come back to Mishel.
I didn't want to
with this detail. No.
On my question.
Look through Chazal, and you'll find opinions that say, what's the purpose of marriage, like the purpose of women in Olam Hazeh. So look at the end of Masechet Tanit, and you'll find like different comments, and you can come to crazy, crazy conclusions if you only read one or two or three. So, what is like one of the most ultimate roles that a woman can fill in a man's life?
To wait for her husband to come back from the garage.
This is as far as her reward comes in your learning. Meaning, if women aren't obligated to learn the same way as men, what's the sachar that they have? The sachar they have is that they're the ones who enable the entire process. Meaning, how is Torah learned? Easy, by getting married, having kids. You go to the Beit Midrash, and she holds the fort. She educates the kids to Torah and mitzvot, and they come to a point where they'll be able to pursue their own career in Torah study, regardless of what they do for a parnasa. So, you'll find opinions that say, "En isha ela lenoi," like the greatest role that a woman can fulfill in her husband's life is beauty. It's not beauty like she's cute, a trophy, I can put her on the mantle. This is, beauty is inspiring. Beit HaMikdash, Chazal said, whoever hasn't seen Beit HaMikdash hasn't seen a beautiful building in his life. So what's the purpose of the beauty? Why not go with simplicity? Simple, build it simple, cheap wood, make it look nice, a little bit of stone. That would have been it. Why the gold? Why the tapestry? Why all this? So beauty is inspiring. Beauty is, if it exists for Torah mitzvot. So Hashem, just like He could have made us ruminating mammals, herbivores like cows and goats and lambs, we could eat grass. It may or may not taste good, but that would be enough to sustain us. Our food is delicious. It's beautiful. It has nice presentation. It has flavor. It has balance. So we can appreciate this. You can live life in Technicolor. You can appreciate the high definition, the variety, the colors, the flavors, the shapes, etc. So for a man to find his wife beautiful is inspiring. I could have married any woman and probably found a way to procreate. That would have dispensed maybe one of my major halachic obligations. Not only did HaKadosh Baruch Hu help me find a wife, but this woman is beautiful. She inspires me. She is more than I could have asked for. My kosir rawaya, my cup runneth over. I couldn't. What more could? She could have been blind and handicapped and a tzaddiket and would have met every need a man could possibly want from his wife. She could give him emotional support. She could be wise. She could be intuitive. Top of everything else, she's, I find her beautiful. So the question is, what's beauty? What makes people attracted to things? Is everything that attracts you good or bad? We'll talk about that in a second. That's Mishel. And so you can develop that whole theme. En isha ela lebanim. At the end of the day, the purpose of marriage is procreation. So maybe you find a woman who's sweet and learned and knowledgeable and generous and kind. She does chesed, she's hospitable, but she's 85. So I love 85-year-old women, but don't get me wrong, there's, it's inspiring to see women who've lived life and experienced it and given so much and done so much. I was very close with my grandmother, Allah Shalom. But if a guy in his 20s were to come and say, I'm looking for a zivug, and I say, hey, I have a tzaddiket who is like custom made for you. In fact, she's already eligible for Social Security. She'll take care of some of the parnasa. So, there is, the world was created in such a way that men and women come together and they procreate. This is how HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants His creation to be. He wants us to be active partners in the perpetuation of His creation. So, the ultimate goal of marriage is the procreation. And if I were to focus on that alone, we would go back to maybe the Middle Ages or before that, and we'd be looking for women based on their weight, maybe more than some of the other qualifiers or characteristics. After all, weight was associated with wealth, with health, with surplus, so you can judge your wife's midot with a tape measure and come to the conclusion that she's fertile, or this one is more fertile than that one, and therefore, okay, this is how we breed animals. Sure, if you own goats or lambs, you have to know how to make these calculations, but we don't necessarily choose people like this. You have women serving the purpose of Torah, of enabling you to learn Torah, of being able to educate your children, pass it on. So maybe the purpose of life and the purpose of the role of the woman in a man's life is, to educate. So maybe one woman is more fertile. I mean, it's a funny example, but if, let's say, a guy was widowed or divorced, and so he has to choose between a number of eligible candidates. One woman is divorced and she has more kids, and the other one is divorced but she's more learned. I would say, well, the real focus is Torah. I could have 100 kids, but I want to pass on these values and make sure that their midot are, constantly being checked. So each one of these opinions represents something very deep and very important and very fundamental to the way the world functions. It's not to say that you can take one saying and say, hey, the real purpose of a woman and a man's life is beauty. And I'm sorry, sweetheart, you just don't meet my criteria. I'm going to have to move on. Not my physical look. Right. Not my physical look, is the politically correct.
So wait, are you saying that there's a big scope for a guy that is single to marry a girl that he knows for a fact is not capable of having kids?
No, there are long halachic discussions about this. If a man, again, not to deviate too far from where we started, but it's all Torah and it's more important that what you guys are interested in should be answered.
And I'll take responsibility for it.
No, it is your fault. So the mitzvah breaks down in Mideoraita. It's a machloket. It appears in Masechet Yevamot of all places. You have an obligation to a man and woman come together. Hopefully, leave behind at least one man and one woman. That way, the world is actually not even at a gain. It's breaking even, right? You assume a certain incidence of, unfortunately, mortality, suicide, accidents, people's various orientations. So we're going to have stepped on a lot of toes tonight. We just started. So really, we're not even replacing the population if everybody just has one son and one daughter. But you've dispensed your biblical obligation, and there's a rabbinic obligation with supports already from the Nevi'im to have as many children as you can beyond that. The question then becomes, when do I have to? That's really the halakha l'maaseh. The discussion we just had is, when do I compromise on what? So if I were previously married and I had a son and a daughter, and now I have a choice between a woman who has, a robust physical body that would indicate that she's maybe in better health or perhaps more fertile, or I have a woman who is maybe more compatible in other ways. Maybe she's more learned and more intelligent. That's when these questions come up. So it's an interesting discussion. If you've already fulfilled your biblical obligation, then we would not necessarily weigh in on your decision to marry a woman that's compatible with you in every ideal way. If you have not yet fulfilled your biblical obligation, we might strongly recommend that you make extra efforts to find as much as you can in a woman who's still able to have children. Yeah. So very interesting discussions. I can add, in order to make the discussion that much more complicated, that there were no small number of tzaddikim that never had children, and you have to wonder if it was the man's problem, there's a physiological issue with the man, then a woman is not halachically required to divorce her husband if she wants children, though she's perfectly entitled to, and we would actually force him to give her a get. But the question would become, why, if assuming it wasn't necessarily them, why did they not, either divorce or marry a second wife in order to procreate? So it could well be that there are a number of things. I once asked Rabbi Chaim this question. I mentioned him already today a few times. I asked Rabbi Chaim this question. He made a funny face. He said, look, Mordechai Sharabi never had children. He was married. In fact, after his wife passed away, he married again. He didn't have children from the second wife either. The Chazon Ish never had children. The Lubavitch Rebbe never had children. So I asked him, really, when we were learning in the YU Kolel Dayanut about them, Ibn Ezra, Rabbi Rabian, how do you do these calculations? And was that? Allegorically, metaphorically, in terms of Mishel, maybe, yeah.
According to the opinion that you have to translate, like the Shin and Daba, I feel like that you say you wouldn't feel the mitzvah?
So again, if you tour enough of the Talmud, you'll find that all the Chachamim got married with kids. Huh? Yeah, so...
yeah, children also.
Rav Nachman?
Yeah, but he has a lot of family.
I'm not sure. Are you sure about that he didn't have children? I don't know. I don't know his biography well enough. I should look it up. So, at any rate, Rav Ben Chaim's response was like this. The world is so full of crazy people. It's like, until you find a woman that you like, a woman that you are compatible with, a woman that you can share your life with, it's like, come on, you have to think 10 times before you consider taking your chances and rolling the dice with someone else. You know, he's like, it's not that simple. So even and who knows better the value of procreating than the tzaddikim themselves? And if they themselves made these calculations. So, we don't know what was the reason and why, but he made a powerful case for it. So at any rate, it's an interesting discussion. My point in all this was that the Maharal makes the case that we are horribly imbalanced in our Torah diet. And really what flies, and this is just so you know, 550 years later, it's not like anything's improved. If anything, it's only gotten worse. And if there were yeshivot that really specialized in Talmud, it was probably because they expected you to either have the background or to fill in the gaps on your spare time, which just almost doesn't happen today. You don't have time for it, and you know, we judge a Talmid Chacham based on how much Gemara he knows, how much he learns. People love to hear these speakers, and he quotes you the page and the side and the number and where on the page, you know, like it's impressive. And the reality is that unfortunately we don't have the minds today. Who argues this? I mean, any rabbi alive today compares to what we had 50 or 100 years ago. And because our memory and our RAM and our RAM are so limited, it's definitely coming at the expense of something else. So if all you focus on is the Talmud, you're probably missing other things. Maybe some of it's philosophical, maybe some of it's theoretical, maybe some of it's more abstract, maybe some of it's pretty practical. The Gemara is not necessarily halacha ma'aseh. So our goal in learning, and my goal in teaching, and this shiur and everything else that we do, is really to try to round the picture out. You know, if all you live by is the Talmud, you're missing a lot of facets of Judaism. And if you believe the Talmud contains everything, then why do we need the Mishnah or the Midrash or halachic works that are no longer written, copied right out of the Talmud? And for that matter, what's the Zohar doing in the picture? May as well get rid of that. Tanakh. So, as our theological, philosophical response to the overwhelming popularity of the Talmud today, and the Talmud is great. Don't get me wrong. Gemara is fantastic. It just requires a lot of background. It's in Aramaic. It has rules. It functions on a whole long list of assumptions that it's a little bit hard to teach in a once-a-week setting. When we learn Talmud, it's possible, but it's much more difficult. And even the Talmud itself, by the way, just to prove the point, it's not like anybody begins a Masechet today and finishes it. They do this in Daf Yomi, and Daf Yomi is like not so held by in a lot of circles. What's really popular is to learn only certain chapters of the Talmud. So it's not, you learn the Gemara, what do you do when it comes to Agadah? On your free time, you know? It's not lumdish, it's not my ox hit your ox and knocked out an eye, and now how much is it worth, and who pays what, and what happens if it killed it. Okay, so, again, quoting the guys that came before us. So, a little bit of background on Mishel. Chazal have a very fascinating quote about Sefer Mishel, where they said that the Torah pre-Shlomo HaMelech could be compared to a cup of boiling water that was inaccessible, that anyone who tried to hold it would basically scald their hand. And the benefit of Sefer Mishel, the bracha that it brought to the Torah world, was that it gave the Torah an ozen, it gave the Torah an ear. This is how Chazal referred to cups with handles. If you ever look at a mug, it actually is shaped very much like a human ear. And this is the term Chazal used for a handle. So the Torah was boiling hot, and how do you approach it? How do you tackle it? Shlomo HaMelech said, what we're missing is Mishalim, literally. Not even Proverbs, by the way. That's a bad translation. It's a very poor translation. Mishal in Hebrew means an analogy, a metaphor, an allegory, something along those lines, where you want to understand something difficult, and the Midrash, or the Talmud, the Midrash actually is full of Mishalim, full of these kinds of things. The Midrash will tell you, if you want to understand what happened in this particular story, you can understand it from a parable involving a man who only had one son and did this, a king who only had one daughter and she was the most precious thing in the world, and when it came time to marry her off, etc. Or a man who had a really dear friend who was held in captivity, how does he get him out? So, what exactly does that mean? What does it imply for the learning of Torah? The Maharal's answer, the philosophical, somewhat abstract answer would be that the Torah deals with very abstract concepts. A lot of it is just very distant history, but a lot of the intrigues, a lot of the plots in the Torah are not very well understood. And so Shlomo Melech gave you these handles, these like small steps that you can climb in order to gain better insight. It's not to say that the metaphor or the analogy or the parable is the point itself. Just like no one drinks handles, you use the handle in order to hold a cup of something that's otherwise too hot to hold. And the advantage of having a mashal at your disposal is that the mashal is going to make something clearer to you, something that up until now was inaccessible to you. It gives you this kind of intermediate step. It gives you an indication, an illusion, some kind of a tip as to where to go with the information. And at the same time, it's you learn it realizing full well that that's not the point. That mashal is not the point per se. It just gives you a better understanding of what's actually behind the story in the Torah. So examples abound. I could give you quite a few. One of the more popular midrashim that you may not have heard before is actually describes the catastrophes that began in series and in stereo in Poshat Bahalotcha, and that basically continued throughout almost the end of Chumash B'Midbar, which is Am Yisrael was taken out of Egypt by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He gave us the Torah, he pulled off these 10 plagues, he split the sea, brought us the man, right, sweetened the water. I mean, what more could we have asked? Before you're tempted to answer no, obviously you can ask for as many things as you can ask for, because what does it cost to ask? So the Midrash puts this in a very clever way. It's very deep at the same time. You can learn Midrashim on more than one level, and that's part of the beauty of Sefer Mishel. Mashal lema davar domeh. So if you'd like some kind of a parable, some kind of an analogy, through which you can understand the interaction between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Am Yisrael, you can compare this to a man who has a son that he loves very much. So the man is a grown man, so he's tall, and the son is short. And the son doesn't really see much in the horizon. So the father picks him up, he puts him on his shoulders, and he says, do you see what I see now? Can you see the trees? You can see the forest, you can see the rivers, the lakes, the valleys, the mountains. You can see, for quite a distance. Basically tripled or quadrupled your height. So all along the son is saying, this is great, this is fantastic, my father is the greatest father in the world, he's the biggest, the strongest, the best. And then all of a sudden, the son encounters someone who's walking, the opposite direction, and he says to him, it's been a while, have you seen my father? So the father says, wait a second, I've been carrying you on my shoulders the entire distance from when I picked you up until now. I've been the one who enabled you to see all these sights, the birds, the trees, the animals, the lakes, the streams, the rivers, the valleys, the gorges, etc. And you're now asking people where I am. So he throws him off his shoulders. He puts him back on the ground with disgust. What do you understand from the Midrash? That Am Yisrael is heavy. That our father's neck was getting chafed or sore or tired. I mean, clearly you can't take these things literally. You can't go from the Midrash directly into the Torah and say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is like our physical father. His hair is kind of white, and maybe it's not as thick as it used to be when he was younger. Maybe he has a little bit of extra pounds, etc. This is clearly absurd. So what can you use from the Midrash? What is actually helpful and useful, and where are the points that you can use to compare?
So you could say that, they're constantly asking for something, and then it's like, where are you? And then Hashem gets upset and punishes Bnei Israel. They're upset.
The simplest, most obvious answer is that we were looking for affection, for attention, for honestly luxury. You have to say. This past week's parasha we talked about quail. Come on, that's me. I mean, it's close to me, but it's biblically speaking, it's actually part of it. It's only rabbinically that we hold that it's me. Just had to make that disclaimer. At any rate, HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed us a bunch of amazing things. Take the Midrash one step deeper. So he showed us all these wonderful, amazing, incredible things, and it was only thanks to him and his, I would say, almost artificially holding us up, that we were able to witness everything that we saw. Why do I say artificially? Because it's not like the father was a magician and made the son big and said, hey, if you could see what I could see, you'd behave like an adult too. It's the son was riding on his father's shoulders, which we understand to be a little bit, anyone who's done this, it's great and it's cute and it's sweet, but it's a little bit irritating at some point because the kids lean this way and that way and chafes and scratches and make your neck hot. But it's a kind of temporary situation where it's not going to last forever. I'm going to give you a boost. You're going to be able to see things that you otherwise wouldn't be able to see. Why would I do this for you? Right? Because I want to spend the rest of my life with you on my neck? Of course I do. Is this the goal or the purpose of parenthood? This is how a father sees a child. So, it's a temporary situation. It gives the child something. Interestingly enough, it wasn't something physical, it was something, it was technically physical but not tangible. In other words, it was a view. So I'm going to pick you up. You're in a low place, I pick you up, put you in a high place. Now you can see things you otherwise wouldn't be able to see. What am I expecting by the time I put you down? Because it's going to happen sooner or later. Is that? Well,
Faith.
I would say as a
Or like,
as a proud and happy father, thanks in Olam Haba.
loyalty.
Good luck. Don't hold your breath for your kids to thank you in Olam Hazeh. Probably not going to happen. But perspective. I picked you up, and this is again just playing with the midrash like Lego. I picked you up so that you could see something that you otherwise couldn't see, right? How do we peel off the midrash and try to figure out what it's telling us about this relationship we have with the Kodesh Baruch Hu? Well, we were in a very low place in Egypt, right? Not just geographically low, but spiritually low. Lots of things that we couldn't see, lots of things that we couldn't understand, that we couldn't appreciate. Because when you're a slave and you're working hard, it's really hard to appreciate things, it's really hard to reflect, to look around you, to consider your priorities, etc. It's kind of like living in New York City. And when you can't see the sky. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, what you're missing is perspective, and you can't see these things on your own, I'm going to intervene. I'm going to do something artificial. I'm going to give you a better view than you typically have. It's only temporary, okay? Because the purpose of life is not that you sit on my shoulders and look around. The purpose of life is that you develop a perspective. Is that you appreciate right from wrong and good for bad and long-term versus short-term and all these lovely things that some of us learn by the time we're adults. So when the child enjoys the perspective but doesn't appreciate where the perspective came from, it's like the child has you're tempted to say, no perspective on perspective. So you enjoyed what you saw. Do you understand why you saw it? Do you understand why I made this possible for you? Do you have any appreciation of what you saw now that you can no longer see it? I exposed you to something, but it was only temporary. My hope is that you take this with you, like this would be a meaningful lesson to you. So, not only did you not appreciate what I showed you, you actually have no gratitude to you at all. You could have at least said thank you for the perspective, but now that I'm back on my feet, it's not that fun. So, it implies a certain degree of merit and demerit in the sense that if I had merits of my own, I could see for myself, but I couldn't. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu kind of, let's say artificially, give us the perspective as if we had the merits, as if we deserved this kind of intervention, as if something we did, created a situation that brought about these miracles, that we can look and say, hey, we've been working so hard, we've been abused so much, and finally our captors and our enslavers are the ones being punished. It's amazing to see divine justice like this right before your eyes after 210 years. And instead of that, we just go back to complaining. So it's a pretty tremendous disappointment. A father and son, so okay, I picked you up, you didn't appreciate it, so whatever, it's life. It's not, depending on how old the kid is. Talking about an entire nation, the frustration is huge. In other words, frustration. HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs antidepressants, but the disparity between what Hashem expected and what we actually did was enormous. And the disrespect, the lack of perspective, the lack of gratitude was appalling after so many years and so many opportunities that we had to stop and thank Hashem for what He did. So in the end, we get punished. But we get punished more severely than would have been punished if we hadn't had that experience in the first place. Right? You have no money, you have no money. You borrowed money and didn't pay it back, you're going to pay interest, you're going to pay penalty, pay fees and fines, etc. So, the frustration that comes out in Chumash B'Midbar is actually worse than what might have been if these miracles hadn't happened. So we didn't leave Egypt based on merit. And Hashem said, you know what? It's like rehab. You can't handle your own issues. Let's just artificially put you in a situation where some of your needs are tended to. We'll give you tender love and care that you're not going to get on the streets, and we'll hopefully turn you into a responsible adult that can first of all get his or her act together, and then eventually help other people. So Hashem gives us spiritual rehab. I'll give you an opportunity to see things you would otherwise never see, to experience things you would otherwise never experience, and hopefully the impression lasts long enough that you grow up and mature in the meantime. And when that doesn't happen, that is cataclysmic. And that's how you come to a point where this entire generation has to die. Not one of these people can continue living and walk into Israel, with the exception of a very small number of tzaddikim, Kalev, Yoshua, and probably all the women. That's actually true. Look at the Midrashim, but it's not so simple. It doesn't seem like women are punished. So the theological, the Hashqafah depravity of the men of that generation was so profound, Hashem didn't want any one of them to walk even one step in Israel. Like, let this whole degenerate group decompose, and maybe their kids have a chance. Maybe their kids can. That sounds kind of harsh, but that's what happened. Exactly what happened. Anyway, to get back on the topic of Mishel, we'll actually leave the first mashal I meant to go into for next week, but the introduction is probably the most important of the classes. So, the beauty of a mashal, and the more beautiful the mashal, the more this is true, is that it captures, Rav Rebbe would put it like this: it captures as much truth as possible in as few words as possible. This is the definition of Kedusha. It's how much can you express with how little material. So there are people who are gifted speakers, but a gifted speaker can sometimes talk for a really, really long time and tell lots of stories in order to get one point across. And there's someone who can say one or two lines and the point registers. It depends on the speaker, depends on the audience, I admit. But the beauty of words, the beauty of communication is keeping it short, simple, and effective. Sometimes you add words like formalities, dear so-and-so, how have you been, how are you feeling, dive right in, but the purpose of communication is to get things across. Maybe the purpose of the communication is to communicate an emotion. So what's wrong with a husband sending his wife a text message? I think you're great. I think the only purpose women serve in a man's life is beauty, and you did it. I think this is the culmination of all of my dreams and years of study, to find a woman who's so sweet, so mature, so spiritually capable, etc. So you can communicate all kinds of different things, but the ultimate in efficiency and in content is keeping the words minimal and the message powerful. So a powerful mashal is going to be true on more than one level, right? You have Aesop's fables, and it's cute. You have the tortoise and the hare, and you have the fox and the raven, the crow. You have all these cute stories of animals doing things, and you can kind of learn from this to how people behave. Mishel is on a totally different level. And to prove the point, you'll find throughout the Midrashim and throughout the Zohar HaKadosh many references to psukim in Mishel, which means that these psukim are not just true, like, oh, here's a cute way of looking at your relationship with God, but you'll find very often, and this is confusing, a mashal that's going to say, one example that I meant to discuss tonight would be explaining the realities of temptation in Olam Hazeh and peer pressure as a man who's walking on a path and he encounters bandits, degenerates, etc. Maybe the story took place in Washington Heights, and he's tempted by these people to join them. They offer him certain things. It's not clear what he has to give up or what he has to relinquish in order for this partnership to work out, and therefore, he's like left in a dilemma. And then the advice given by the author, Shlomo Melech, is don't go with them, even if they promise you this, it won't happen. So this midrash, you're going to find at least 4 or 5 opinions that are going to explain that this midrash, it's a reality of life in general, which is true. Maybe the midrash is true of Yosef and his brothers, how there was a gang, there was 10 of them, it was a band of people who were very angry and very jealous and very bitter, and they had promised themselves and each other all kinds of things. They didn't realize what it was going to cost them. By the time it happened, it was too late. So this can be true too. Both opinions can be concurrently true. It's it's like a chemical formula that's just true everywhere in the universe. It's a difficult concept to get across. So think of things like, if you remember anything about atomic theory, what atoms look like and how they're composed and how atoms interact with each other, and sometimes they join in to form molecules. And so everything you know is based on these concepts. You may not appreciate the differences between metals and gases and liquids, etc. But at the end of the day, these are the rules that govern how matter works. Mishel, the Torah in general, Mishel in particular, these are like the rules that govern certain realities in the universe. And so the Mishal is going to be true at the simplest level, right? This is a mother addressing her son and telling him what to do and what not to do. So yeah, many of us have been through that situation before, parent-child kind of interactions. And the parent-child interaction can be compared to any one of a number of stories in the Tanakh, to Adam and Chaim, to Yaakov and Yosef, to Abraham and Yitzchak, or Abraham and Ishmael. And then another opinion is going to tell you, actually what the Midrash is, what the Mashal is talking about, is your relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Or, meaning you as the individual, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the God in interaction with you. When it comes to Am Yisrael as a collective, you'll find that many of the Midrashim are used to refer to the same thing. So, what's true on a personal, individual level could be true at the family level, it could be true at the husband-wife level, which could then be compared to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Am Yisrael in that kind of a perspective. So, these Mishalim are very powerful because they shed light on all these realities at once. This is the rule. Very often, what a parent feels towards a child is the same feeling that a teacher feels towards a student, and the same feeling that a prophet would feel vis-a-vis the nation, or HaKadosh Baruch Hu looking at his creation. Kind of microcosms one of the other, and the setting probably has more in common than it doesn't. So we'll go over a couple of these examples much more in depth. We're not going to do this one now. We'll do it next week with God's help. But be prepared for that. We'll actually bring up a mashal. We'll take like a classic example, and we'll just analyze it at more than one level. In other words, we'll see what the simple pshat means. We'll see which situations Chazal compared and contrasted it to, or applied it to. And then you'll see how you can kind of abstract this all the way up and say, wow, this is a pasuk that talks about God. This tells us about our relationship with God and how and why it works or doesn't work in certain ways. So feel free to take a quick breather, intermission. We'll pick it up.
Can see that this is sponsored by Goy in memory of ShaBaSh.
Yes, okay, so the nourishment and the Torah, the spiritual and physical nourishment are sponsored by generously by Kohen Shabbat, Limni Shmat Rafael Chaim Shlomo ben Anais.
Zach Baruch.